So this fantastic landscape in Bourgogne inspired Henning very much. Before we lived in Barbizon for 2 years, and then his paintings were very different. You could feel the texture of the forest, but here the painting became more open, and there's no doubt that this fantastic flowing landscape inspired his paintings. I mean, even for a Norwegian, it's a beautiful landscape, who is used to big mountains. But it's peaceful, it's intact, it's genuine, c'est pas touristique, it's not touristy. So, of course, when you live in la campagne, in the countryside, you really feel the nature and the change of nature in the different seasons. Like we always stayed here all July and August, where Henning painted. That was the painting season, and the winters could be dark and tough, and that of course influenced the paintings also. You really feel the nature and the seasons and the change of seasons very strongly living here, which is important. We met Carl Appel at an opening in '75, and we had started 2 years after to look for a place. Appel said, "Come and see my castle." So we went with Appel, and we came here in his car, and we saw this place. It wasn't like this, like it is today. It was overgrown, no flowers, no nothing, and it was because he hasn't lived here for many, many years. So we came and we looked at it, and 3 hours later we had signed. You know, you have to take fast decision in life, but I had looked for a whole year to find a place for Henning and me to buy, because we had decided after 2 years to get married. So when we saw this, and this is perfect for a painter, it couldn't be better. So Molesmes became a kind of center, a center for work. We traveled a lot, in different places every year, but this was our home. This was our first home, which we built together. It was a good place to work. It was friends came, and it's a meeting place for health, work, and pleasure, as I say. In the morning, Henning was reading to prepare himself to paint, and if I had an exhibition or if I went up to my chambre noire in the dark room, and I usually worked at night actually. But we both had our lives separate and lives together, which is very important. I mean, we both independent people, and at the same time there was a wonderful comradeship, wonderful way together, which I think is the most important. When you live together, you have your own work, you have your own life, and then you meet and you discuss, and it's a life together, first of all. And then we went to Autun, and we discovered Eva in the museum. During the Reformation, of course, all the sculptures, they were kind of cut off, and it was found when they tore down a pharmacy. It was found they used it as a support, and this is a beauty. And that inspired Henning to Eva paintings. Maybe he did many hundreds. Eva and the apple, and Eva. And it's a superb relief. It's wonderful. There's a wonderful story about my voisine, my neighbor. She said, "Vous savez, madame, c'est pas un vrai château parce qu'il n'y a pas un tour. you know, it's not a real chateau because there is no tower. So I said, yes, vous avez raison. Yes, you are right. There is no tower. C'est une grande maison bourgeoise. I don't know why in Molesmes they call it Château de Molesmes. The advantage of being a painter is that you have, you can be in this beautiful atelier. When I have to go up into my chambre noire, to my dark room, it's less fun because then you are working in the dark. And you're working with a lot of chemicals and you have to make the tirage, and it's a completely different way, but that's the manual work. And often what happens with the great photographers like David Smith and Adams, the miracle happened actually in the darkroom. They reworked their things in the darkroom. And also Ansel Adams, of course. That's when the final result came. Henning worked wonderfully well in this beautiful atelier and with a beautiful view over the hills, and it was peaceful, quiet. And on the floor you see actually the painting spots, both of Appel and of Henning. So it's a very sacred floor. In Barbizon we rented a house, and we stayed actually for 2 years. We rented a beautiful house, and where he painted also wonderful paintings, but very much inspired by the forest. There are 2 downstairs in the living room over the cheminée, which is painted in Barbizon, and there is another one, and you can clearly see the difference, the difference of painting, which is much more impressionistic, the one from Barbizon. The forest, the light which comes through the trees, and the texture is completely different than, you have a completely different landscape. You have the cloud more, you see the sky more, you have a different light. So his paintings changed after he came here. So there is the Barbizon period for 2 years. And when we bought this house from Appel in '77, definitely his style of painting changed. So even if he uses the same iconography all the time, the manière he paints is very different. So it's like when you also go with all the travels we have been doing, you can see the light from Martinique, you can see the light from Haiti, you can see they're all different. The light and the environment inspires him. Even if he uses the same symbols, you see the same kind of constellation of birds and ships and stars and heaven and the earth, very much universal theme. So all the voyage, all the journeys which we have taken during all the years has always inspired Henning afterwards to paintings, wonderful paintings. Because on the journeys we made, he always had watercolor. It was easy to carry and it dries fast and so on. And when he came back, he painted a beautiful series. Like here, this is a series which is inspired from Egypt. We stayed in beautiful, beautiful atelier. We had some friends in Egypt, Salah and Lise. Lise was Danish, Salah was Egyptian. And we stayed in a wonderful house by Bitter Lake, which is near Aswan, and where he did also beautiful watercolors. So when he came back, these are paintings from 2000. All these 3 paintings was inspired from this beautiful light, ethereal light, the canal, the boats. You see the boats, you see this usual imagery. And there are 3 superb paintings. All the members of the Cobra group are actually very left, and somewhere or other communist inspired. And at the opening of the Städtliche in '48, there was a big ballade, there was a big noise because they made a lot of speeches and so on. But Henning was, since he was very young, since he was 16, he was in the party of the young Communist Party. And he was actually Henning was a born folk speaker. You won't believe it when you meet him the first time, because he can be very shy and he doesn't talk. In France he was known as the silent Henning. But when he started talking, he could make speeches spontaneously like that, without a manuscript, without anything. Superb. He was really fantastic orator. So all the Cobra artists actually had the same left humanistic tradition or interest. So Henning was one of the founders of Cobra, together with Constant and Asrayon. Asrayon was more international at that time. He was more international involved. He went early to Paris in the 30s, 37. Henning and Else and Asrayon and Bille, they're all in Karl Appel, Alechinsky and Corneille and D'Autremont. They were all kind of the founding, that was the group, the core of Cobra. So already from the start, Henning was a part of that group. So already from 48, they were very active, exhibiting internationally. In 51, there was the exhibition in Liège, also. And so from the beginning, Henning was a natural part of that group, an important one also. I've spoken with Appel and Corneille in New York at the Galerie Lefebvre, where they all exhibited, and they said that Carl-Henning has played a very big role in the way of looking at art. That was in Jerusalem, 1975. When I met Henning, and I met him, he was then a guest at Mishkenot Shananim. He was doing paintings, and he was invited to come. And they had atelier at that time. They had atelier, wonderful atelier. So he was painting, and I met him through Herbert or Susi Pundig. So they're very important. They were the one who brought us together, which is very important. Herbert invited Henning to come to Jerusalem, and I was at that point teaching at the Art Academy, Betzalel. And as a matter of fact, I was on my way back to the States when I met Henning. But he fell in love. It is a story which all of my friends in Jerusalem, they followed. It was wonderful. They all said, "Oh, he's wonderful, you have to say yes, you have to say yes." So I said, "Well, but it's an age difference, and I had been married before, and I wanted to be sure, and I was on my way back to the States, where I was going to open up a design department in Ball State University in Indiana. But Henning, he is a force of nature, and when he has decided something, that's it. So I fell for the Grand Danois, and I make a joke. I said, the Grand Danois met a Norwegian mountain goat in Jerusalem. So sometimes there are miracles happening in Israel. And I certainly need some miracles now. So that's how we met. And that's when Henning we decided to find a place in France, because Henning always wanted to paint in France, and I always loved France. So we found this wonderful magic place, Molesmes, finally. I always say it's not by chance that Henning and I met, maybe. I went to San Francisco in the 60s, 64. And then I studied at Berkeley University. I studied painting, of all things. I had studied interior design before in Copenhagen. And I was working at architect offices. And then I decided to study painting at the University of Berkeley. So, in a way, we are in the same world. We were in the same world, and when we met, I knew Henning, as a matter of fact, before. When I studied in Copenhagen, I saw his paintings at the exhibitions. So I knew of him, I knew his name. So when we met in Jerusalem, at the friend's house in Karem, the place of the John Baptist, that's his birthplace, I knew of him. And it's a wonderful story. When we said hello, and I was sitting in a chair on the terrace, and he said, "Are you married?" No, he said, first of all, "Are you engaged?" So I said, no, you don't engage in these days. We don't do this. "Well, are you married?" So I said, "No, but I wouldn't mind." "Well, we can arrange that." That was our first meeting. Many people ask me, how is it to live with an artist and who paints all the time? And I say that's quite normal. He has his work. And I think what is important is that I understood his paintings. And I know what it takes to create. There are many ways of being creative, you know. The fact that I have the background as an interior designer, in architecture, in painting, and it's a natural way of living. I was interested in photojournalism, not in photos as a fine art, because I never rather paint, because of the material, because of the colors. And photojournalism, for me, was the most important thing, and that's the only thing a camera can do, which a painter can't do. They can't catch just the instant moment, split second of the moment, politically, socially, and humanly. That's only the camera which can do, and that always interested me. Travel has always been a great source of inspiration for both me and Henning. It was part of our lives. We couldn't live without traveling. To create is to live, and to live is to create. Life without creating is boring. It's your experience of living, your experience of the human beings around you, the experience of life. You just want to share it in a way. You want to share your experience of, for example, this beautiful birdsong outside. And so it's a natural way of expressing since the birth of human being. Human being has always been creative, luckily. Henning was an imaginative world, inside, intérieur, a dream world, maybe a fantasy world of maybe the castle, the birds, his usual iconography. It was a wishful, dreamful world of how maybe life could be. And the inspiration is the sky, it's the air, it's the water, it's the life itself, which he expresses then in the face of a woman. You have the boat, you have the sun, you have the stars, but in the composition and in the world which has nothing to do with the real world. It's an inside interior. And of course the Cobra group is known for having inspiration from from folk art very much.
For me, it's very clear and simple. It's a relation between, it's a bridge between imagination and reality. Voilà, this is obvious because Sidsel is a photographer. She really lives in the real world, and Henning is a dreamer, a dreamer in color and in shapes, and he lives in an overworld which is very typical, his own overworld, but which is typically Danish, I think. And before Henning, there was another big dreamer which was called H.C. Andersen, and who has written tales, fairy tales, but it's not fairy tales, eventyr, as the Danish say. And there is really the same kind of mind, of ontological position between Carl-Henning Pedersen and Hans Christian Andersen. The definition of the artist now in the beginning of the new century is completely different at what it was just after the Second World War. The artists at the time were very much more ambitious than the artists today are. They thought that through painting they really wanted to, if not change the world, at least to express something which was a bye-bye to the old period, the horrible period of fascism and the World War, and a new period, a new opening for humanity, for men. And they were optimistic. They were optimistic, very much optimistic. Cobra, it now sounds incredible, but it was an optimistic reunion of great artists.
Clean a little bit the bad herbs. Il faut désherber. And the roses need to be cut, given water. The books was the only thing I brought back with me from the States in the 70s. You know, most people come back with Millionaire, but I came back with all my books and the old-fashioned records. With all the journeys I have made in many, many, many different countries like Peru, Bali, Jerusalem, Haiti, Burma, it's the everyday life I meet on the street. And these people are extraordinary. I always try to photograph, I try to be invisible if it is impossible, if it is possible to be invisible. Sometimes I follow a subject for hours, I hide, I try, so they don't know that they are photographed. And I call them everyday heroes because the way they manage to survive in the most difficult circumstances, in the most poor countries, like for example Haiti, which extremely poor, and I went photographing in the slum quarters, and still they have a kind of survival humor or fitness, or they survive in a very kind of graceful way, actually. Amazing. So I call them everyday heroes. They are really heroes. In 1978, for the first time, I took a charter to China with Henning. It was amazing because we entered the country before it had opened up to the rest of Europe, so it was entirely intact. We came, luckily, there was the 5th National Congress, which I managed to photograph, and we went to several places, to Hangzhou, Canton, and it was amazing. It's a life completely d'ailleurs. It's outside time, and I photographed the wallpapers on the wall, which is very interesting. And I had a fight with this guy because obviously he must have been on the set. They must have written something about him. So he was trying to get my camera, and I was holding on to it and said, "Careful, careful, we are guests." I tried to, so finally he let me go, and there was a lot of people around, people looking, and I said, "Come on, help me." So finally he left, and I continued my photographing, and I looked back and I saw 2 guys, obviously, following me to see what I was up to. 1981, we took a wonderful journey to Peru, Henning and I. And again, it's the same, it still wasn't ruined too much by tourism. So when we went to Cusco, it was quite intact also, and the big market in Puno, I managed to take some photos which was very authentic. And there was a big deal with the market woman said, be careful, they will steal your camera, you know. And they really tried. It's not quite safe, but we managed very well. We went to the Tequila Island, the floating islands. We took some photos. I went many times to Haiti from New York, 81, 82, and luckily Henning never came with me to Haiti because he would have been very interested in working there. At the time when I was there, Baby Duck was the son of Duvalier, and he was still, so it was Baby Duck who was in power at that point, and it was before all the later difficulties started. It was before the pressure cooker blew up, to put it that way. So it's a big, big market. I went from Port-au-Prince to Cap-Haïtien, and that's where I met this wonderful boys who was washing in. They were with soap and washing in a stream. And this is the cover of my book, A Photographic Odyssée, which, by the way, won the prize Prix Marmottan des Beaux-Arts. And I took a photo of them, and they asked, where do you get the beautiful muscles from? Well, they do karate. In the Cap-Haïtien, I photographed the burial where they kind of went into a trance. But it's markets. It's a big market. It was a very interesting island, very colorful, very. Then I went into the Port-au-Prince, into the poor quarter. And this guy with the scar came and said, can I help you? And he looked very kind of hoo-hoo. And then there was a man coming up, a very official man, and I knew he would say, don't photograph because this is a slum quarter. So immediately, before he could say anything, I said, I fall in love with Haiti, which was true. I had fallen in love with it, because either you don't like it or you fall in love with it. So, and this young man, he wants to help me. And the guy, he said, okay. So he looked at the guy, and then I was safe. So he helped me, and I walked around, I photographed many slum scenes, poverty, of course. And there was one street I wanted to go into. He said, no, I don't dare to. In 1993, Henning and I went 6 weeks to Bali. And that was a very, very important journey we did together. It's a magic island. It's the island of dance. It's an island of great beauty, both the people and the nature. Margaret Mead made a film, the anthropologist. She made a film about the magic dances in '94, and Cartier-Bresson also in the '50s, and he managed to really catch the real trance dance. They have the Baron Theatre, which we saw, and the most impressive one was the Ketchak dance, which we saw in a tiny little theatre. There was no tourists, because I had a very nice friend who helped me to find places where they had the important things where the tourists didn't know about. And it was only lit by candlelights. And there's always the fight between the evil and like Baron is the evil goddess, the goddess of death, and the fight between good and evil, always. And back to the Ketchak dance, there was no music, and the sound comes from the stomach, like that was that. And I was standing in the back photographing. There was only wood benches. It was only lit by candlelights. And Henning was sitting in front. He became so afraid, so he moved. So I managed to take some photos, which I think caught the spirit of the dance. So we went traveling, and we had a hotel, and I managed to get a special room for him, and he made beautiful watercolors in this on the island while I was out photographing, and which was later exhibited. We had many exhibitions together with my photographs and his watercolors. After Bali, the year after, we met Herbert Pundik. He said, "You have to go to Burma." So I said, "Yes, okay, we go to Burma." Pundik had made an article about San Suu Kyi when she was in house arrest, a wonderful article. So we went to Burma, and again, we were very lucky because we entered a country which was again intact, and tourism hadn't started, it was closed. We have had a lot of chance, Henning and I, that we have been traveling in countries before they opened up to the West, to the American culture, and we have entered really a genuine milieu. Also, like in Burma, San Suu Kyi was still in her house arrest at that point when we came. And Rangoon was an extremely interesting place. I think we were the only tourists. I didn't see any other tourists. And we went to the Shwedagon. There was this big, enormous temple place, beautiful, which I also managed to photograph. And I photographed people, and they were so busy with their own, they didn't even see me. I mean, it was great to photograph. And we went to Inle Lake. Also, no tourists, and we went to some monasteries where I managed to take some photos of some monks, and I had a very funny conversation with them, and of course Pagan, the temple, the big, enormous temple place, which goes on for kilometers. So we had a guide, and we visited and traveled up and down all those stairs on the temples, and where I also managed to take some good photos of Henning with his Nike shoes. I have for many, many, many years traveled in Greece, without Henning, before Henning, and with Henning. And the Greek islands are fascinating, especially Amorgos. We went to the monastery in the Hora, which is built into the cliffs and goes straight down into the sea. Amazing. Corbusier was there in '54, and I think he even has written his name in the book. And I spoke to there were two monks there when we came, and one of them was very funny. He said, "Socialismus, socialismus, le diablo." And I took a lot of photographs of people on the island, and particularly Elias. He knew English a little bit, and he had come with a sentence which I love. They always sit in the cafes, right? And Elias says, "I'm sitting all day in the cafe waiting for what? I do not know." It's straight out of Beckett. It's a wonderful sentence. Egypt is a very special place for Henning and me. In the 90s, Henning was invited to to exhibit in the Cairo Biennale. He was a guest of honor, and we had also an interesting time. We had a guide, and I was allowed to try to go out and photograph, which I didn't quite like, because I like to have photographs real life, not tourist life. So we went to Aswan. We had and we stayed. It's a nice story when we ended up in Agatha Christie's room, because first we stayed at the hotel, the famous hotel, and they had given us a very bad room, which I couldn't accept. So finally they said, "Okay, you can stay in Agatha Christie's room," where she apparently had written Death on the Nile or whatever. But it's not easy to photograph in Egypt. But luckily I had Henning with me, so when we were in the Valley of the Kings, I always took Henning with me, so he kind of talked to them in Danish. So they forgot me. Saying, "What is this strange man doing? What is he saying?" So I managed to take some good photographs. In the 80s, by chance, I met a journalist from Holland who was working for Handelsblad, and he was looking for a photographer. He said, "Tomorrow I'm going to interview UNESCO. I need a photographer." So I said, "That's fine, I'll do it." So that started a whole series with him, which was published in the Handelsblad. And the story with UNESCO was very amusing, actually. I had met him before, many years ago in Jerusalem. The other interesting personality I photographed for Handelsblad was Fernand Braudel. What is amazing is during the war, he wrote his most important work, which was the foundation of the Nouveau Annales, the Nouveau historic direction, this Annales. And he was such a gentle, beautiful man. He impressed me very much. In '88, Hans Nammut came to visit us here in Molesmes. I've known him from New York. I also knew his wife, and we have a lot of meetings together. And he came here, and he photographed Henning. And while he was photographing Henning, I was photographing him. arrived in Jerusalem in 1972, where I was invited to teach at Bezalel, the Academy of Art, and I immediately started photographing. I have photographs from Jerusalem, from Jaffa Gate, which really looks biblical. It looks like it was 1,000 years ago. It's in my book, the Photographic Odyssey. And after also meeting Henning in 1975, we returned often to Jerusalem, where then he made watercolors and I photographed all the time. I made a series about the Falasha, the Ethiopian Jews, when they were making their 1,000 years old prayers in front of the Wailing Wall. They were singing, and I think I was the only person who knew they were there, because nobody knew that they would go and do their 1,000 years old prayers. The person who had introduced me to this was Rachamim, an Ethiopian Jew, and his story is extraordinary. He was 5 years old when he heard about Jerusalem, because his uncle had been there. When I was teaching at Bezalel Academy in Jerusalem, before the Yom Kippur War started, I brought the students up to decorate shelters, to make the sign on the shelters. And so we stayed in the kibbutz, and it was very nice. They were very happy. And when the war started, the military, they were furious that these decorated things that they shouldn't show. But because I had done this project, I had a little piece of paper with red writing to enter the war zone after the war. And we drove up. This little paper with red writing said they were supposed to get the tractor. So we went in, and we went into the war zone, and we came into the ruins from the Six-Day War, which I photographed. And then we went into this battlefield. It was October, it was freezing cold, a cold wind, and you see all these dead Syrian soldiers on the ground. And it's very tough, but the next day I went back and photographed it, because how can you otherwise fight war if not showing the horrors of a war? So again, that is a part of the photojournalism, to show the reality of the disaster of war, whoever is the attacker and whoever is the defender. I also found a little girl in the cellar, a refugee, and I managed to get her out, and she said, you have to bring her to the hospital, etc. When we were walking the next day on the battlefield, the military came, the Israeli soldiers said, are you crazy, we're walking around like that? So, well, we are following the trace of the tractors, I mean, just a lot of mines. But that's what you do when when you're young. Jerusalem has been a very important part of my life. The experience of living and working in this amazing, difficult, crazy country. But then I could walk freely around. I walked freely around everywhere, in the old city, in the Judean hills. I went to Jericho. It was no problem. It was still, I nearly said, civilized. Now the political situation is hopeless. I mean, a better miracle has to happen. Like the miracle that Henning and I met, and voila. After I met Henning in Jerusalem, I got a poem every day. I didn't get a bouquet of flowers, but I got a poem. And if it was one morning I didn't get a poem, I was very disappointed. And one of the poems he writes is called To Cecilia, because he thought Sidsel was such a not very interesting name. So he said, I want to call you Cecilia. So everybody asked, who is this woman, Cecilia? They don't know. And he sent it also to Herbert, because he called Herbert probably 6 o'clock in the morning every day. So Herbert said, "Hey, Henning, are you in love?" So that is the famous Cecilia poems. He wrote several poems, very beautiful, from Jerusalem and from that period. It is amazing what has been created in the name of all the different gods, of all the different religions. And here in Auxerre, the cathedral in Auxerre, you see a wonderful, wonderful example of Gothic architecture, beautiful vitraux from the 13th siècle, 13th century, 15th, 16th century. I'm just amazed when you think, it doesn't matter what religion and what God, how mankind during centuries has been able to create wonders and wonders and wonders. Henning and I became often to the cathedral here in Auxerre to get inspiration for one of his most important monumental works in Denmark, Ribe Cathedral. And we did a whole trip in France to get inspired for his work in Ribe Cathedral. We saw Chagall in Reims. So Ribe Cathedral, his main, I think one of the most important monumental works is the fresque, le chœur, the fresque, and 7 mosaics and 5 stained glass windows, which he did in Denmark it's cut but also painted. It's a mixture of both method. But the most impressive is his mosaics, how it was created. It's amazing. He made a loose drawing on the background, and then imagine he cut all the mosaic, all the tessera was cut by hand. We went to Murano, the island outside Venice. There are 15,000 nuances. So you choose it, they come in the plaque like this, in the plate, and then he says, tuck, 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 he cuts it. I was teasing him once and said, why don't you get some beautiful girls to do the work for you? And then I realized, of course, that's when he works the subject matter. That's when he works the subject matter, and he likes the manual work. Then every day, a piece like this, and he paints with the tessera, like this, tuck, 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 tuck. And when he puts it in the mortar, you can't take it out again. The photographer was photographing him at some point. He said, why do you smile when you put this tessera into the mortar? Because Henning said, well, in the beginning, I'm not sure what to take, but when I put it in, well, then I know it can't be redone. In his studio in Bovbjerg by the North Sea, Henning created one of his most important mosaics for the H.C. Ørsteds Institute in Copenhagen. Cosmic Ocean is considered as one of his major works, and it is absolutely one of his major works. As the architect of the building, Eva and Niels Koppel, writes, Cosmic Ocean is simply one of the greatest works of art created in our time. How Carl-Henning could maintain the unity and richness in this unique mosaic, standing alone, on his scaffolding is inconceivable. It confirms his genius, and it is the fortune of the gods that it will survive a building. Another unique piece of mosaic. The fairy tale universe is created for the former Kennedy School in Glassaxe, done in 1970 to 72. It's another astonishing masterpiece. It's playful and imaginative. Then he did a glass painting for the Resistance Museum in Copenhagen, which is also a different technique than when you cut the glass. And you paint directly on the glass. Then you have his museum in Herning, where he did in Ratingen in Germany, the first circular building. He painted on stoneware, which is burnt to 1,200. And it was a factory which made water toilets and water wash basins in the most horrible pink and blue. But Henning used to paint directly, so he put it a big piece, lot of place on the floor. He painted with a kind of brush which was attached to a fishing rod, and then painted directly on. And the engineer said one day, "Well, I tried to do exactly what Pedersen does, but I didn't get the same result. Maybe he is, after all, a genius." So that was the first round building. Then the pyramid was done in 94. That was made in Den Haag, also, but in different, in a ceramic. The ceramic decoration, the play of imagination around the wheel of life, was finished in 1967. It's a circular ceramic mural, and it is the inner courtyard of the former Angli factory and Herning Art Museum. It's 200 meter long and covers 1,000 square meter. The ceramic tiles are burnt in 1200 degrees and was made in the ceramic factory Elemental, located in Ratingen near Düsseldorf, Germany. At the inauguration, Åge Damgaard asked, "What is your fee?" "You couldn't afford it anyway," Henning said. "It is a gift." That's pretty generous.